Next up we have the brassicaceae, which is the mustard or cabbage family, previously called the cruciferae, and someone made a rule that all of the plant families had to end in A-C-E-A-E, so it became, why they didn't call it the cruciferaceae, I don't know, but it's now the brassicaceae. Occasionally you find cruciferae in some of the older literature. Characteristics, it's a dicot, so we look for those netted leaf veins, and the flower parts are in fours. Flowers are distinctive with the petals forming a sort of a cross, and which was the name for the cruciferae name. It was supposed to be cross-bearing. The typical plant has a basal rosette, which means a bunch of leaves down close to the ground, and then when it blooms it puts up a flower spike. Many of these are biennials, so they grow the first year and just stick with that flower spike, and then the second year or maybe late in the first year they put up that stalk and bloom. So if you think of your broccoli or cabbage, a lot of those types of plants, that's what they do. That's what they're planning to do. We tend to harvest them before they actually go get around to doing it. There are, of course, some variations in there. Some are annuals and some are woodies. The fruit has a unique name called a silique or a silicole, and it may form a lament. I'll talk about that in a minute, but that's the little segments that break off and often then stick to your socks. And characteristic tastes or odors that are in this family is due to compounds called glucosinolate that break down into sort of tangy tasting stuff when it's the cells are crushed. And they are insect pollinated, which has a word just for it called entomogony or entomogenous plants. Here you can see some drawings and a photograph of typical brassicaceae flowers. The stamens tend to be clustered so that there's 4 long ones and 2 short ones. You can see those sort of sticking out of the flowers on the right, the long ones, and you can see the drawing in the upper right. And the petals forming that cross shape that I already mentioned. Now the siliques and the silicoles, one way to remember which is different is a silique is long, as in L is long, and a silicole is tends to be more of a little cute round thing. Along the bottom are a little row of pictures of different kind of silicoles, and the long skinny things on the right are some siliques. You can see to the far right there's a picture of when they finally get ripe and pop open, then they leave that sort of a membrane thing stuck to the plant, and the sides of the fruiting body sort of pop open and release the seeds. And then you can see the lumpy one, that's a lament with the seeds are in different little segments. The little taxonomy, they're of course in the kingdom Plantae. These are true dicots in the angiosperm clade. Brassicales is the order, and this is the only family in the order. The splitters have been at this family similar to the Liliaceae. There's about 330 genera left in the family with close to 4,000 species. And cruciferae were, I already mentioned, were previously called the cruciferae. Looking at our plant evolutionary tree, we're now on the upper right. You can see the brassicales in the rosed section of plant evolution. So we've moved up quite a few notches from some of those that we've been looking at the last couple times. And these are definitely getting towards the upper end of plant evolution. Lots of notable species in this family. They're important food plants in particular. They're widespread in North America. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens. Believe it or not, they're all the same species. They're all Brassica oleracea that, or maybe oleracea, I don't know, that have been selected for different features. Also, turnip and Chinese cabbage is Brassica rapa. Canola is Brassica napus. Radish is Raphanus sativus. Horseradish is in this family. Watercress, another widely used, not so much in the United States, but elsewhere, Nasturtium officinale. Money plant is a horticultural species, Lunaria. And then, unfortunately, garlic mustard is in this group. And Arabidopsis thaliana is a research plant that's quite famous. I will discuss more later. Here are some examples of the different Brassica oleracea varieties, all starting from the same plant and domesticated, over hundreds of years, so that it's hard to imagine that they came from the original plant and that they are actually so similarly related, but they are. So cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, broccoli, and there's several others in that category also. Some examples of brassicaceae that are edible. Horseradish is rather famous. Horseradish, of course, is one of those things you either like or you don't. It's the root, which is harvested, mixed with vinegar to make the horseradish prep that you buy in the grocery store. It's also called sting nose, which I think is probably a really good name for horseradish. I happen to live in near the, actually not near, on the west side of Ankeny, but when they're grinding up the horseradish at the Tones plant on the east side, you can smell that odor very, very, very widely. They've been cultivated for a long time. They're even in Greek mythology. There's a mural of them in Pompeii. And so it's been around a long time, used for a lot of different types of foods. Peroxidase enzyme is used in biochemistry a lot, so it has actually some research ties also. There's a lot of very routine assays and things that are used in biochemistry work that use horseradish peroxidase. There's about 6 million gallons of it produced annually just in the U.S., so that's a lot of horseradish. And believe it or not, Germans put it in their beer. Another edible example is kohlrabi, which is very popular in German, and the name, you can see the translation there. Kohl is German for cabbage, and rabi is German for turnip. So that's how they're looking at it, as a great big turnip, I guess. It originated as much as 400 or 500 years ago. There's a lot of different varieties. Some of them are used for cattle, and some are for humans. The leaves are eaten like collards, and it's common in Europe and Kashmir recipes. Extremely widely used research plant is Arabidopsis thaliana. It's sort of the research equivalent of mice or fruit flies in laboratories. This is a little European plant, turns out to be ideal for researchers. It has a very small genome. It was one of the first, or the first plant genome to be sequenced, and now there's just hundreds of mutations have been identified and are used widely in research. It's attractive, in addition to that small genome, it also can complete its entire life cycle from germination to seed set in 6 weeks under the right conditions, and it's very small, so you can have a lot of them in a laboratory. And at this point in time, there are literally Arabidopsis conferences, there are journals, there are enormously complex websites that house all this genetic information that's now known. There are societies for a pretty unassuming little plant that was just grown on some rocks in Europe someplace. It's had quite an illustrious career. Some horticultural or horticultural example of brassicaceae is the money plant. You've probably seen these in bouquets. They're quite common. They're quite popular in dried flower bouquets. Sometimes they're painted different colors. On the left, you can see it looks like a lot like Dame's Rocket or a lot of the mustards. But when that seed pod, that silicole, matures and flops open, the what we call the little coin is that center membrane is what's left behind. So these plants are grown for that primary purpose. They do have a tendency to be invasive. They can, if you get them in your garden, you can have a hard time getting rid of them. Native brassicaceae, one pretty common one in the Des Moines area is toothwort. You can find these in about any woodland. Most of the Des Moines parks have these early spring. You can get quite a carpet of them. Sweet little flower. Another one is spring cress, Cardamine bulbosa, which you find more in wetter areas. People sometimes use it when they're going to have egg and cress sandwiches. It's kind of a common European food, but some people use it for that purpose here. A non-native brassicaceae that's in Iowa, unfortunately, is garlic mustard. This is one of our most obnoxious invasive species. You can see that picture on the bottom. The garlic mustard is everything green you see in that photograph. It has completely taken over the understory in this woodland. And when it does that, it shades out everything that was going to grow there, the little toothworts that you saw a couple pictures back, and anything else that had been native on that understory is now smothered with lack of light. And additionally, sometimes it puts out some kind of unpleasant chemicals that helps reduce other plants' ability to grow also. The upper picture is the flower and a close-up of the leaves. It does taste like garlic. It was brought here intentionally as a garden herb. In the spring, I've more than once made garlic mustard pesto from folks helping me pull garlic mustard out of parks and places where it shouldn't be. It is a biennial, so if you keep pulling it and don't let it set seed in a given area, you can reduce the population to the point where there's only a few, and then if you keep up on it for those stray seeds, it will germinate years after they've been on the ground. It's possible to get rid of it. It can be very daunting, though, when you have acres of woodlands that have a heavy infestation, and definitely in Des Moines we have a serious problem. It is just everywhere. In the upper picture also, I should point out, you can see in the flowers, like the flower in the lower right has a little thing poking out of it. That is the silique beginning to develop as the flower matures. Let's see. And then also another problem with it that helps make it invasive is that each plant produces thousands of seeds. So anytime you let even one plant go, it very quickly can have your population back up to problem levels. Another non-native brassicaceae species in Iowa is Dame's rocket. This plant is attractive, and it's been sold commercially. People buy wildflower in a can mixes, and sometimes just buy this separately, and not realizing that they're kind of letting the worms out of a can. It can be very aggressive. I've seen it spreading in ditches in the last 5 years quite aggressively in Polk County. You can see a picture of a woodland there where it's been spreading. And also on the left is just a wetter area. It doesn't mind a little moisture, so you do see it in ditches more than a lot of plants. And then the bottom right, you can see the siliques developing, and they're kind of got some lumps in them, so they are like a loment. Toxicity, dose makes the poison. The same compound that gives the attractive flavor to broccolis and mustards and all of those plants in the family that we eat is toxic at high doses. They're generally glucosinolate compounds, which is glucose, 6-carbon structure with different amino acids attached to it, and they're hooked by a sulfur atom. And that sulfur is the source of the smell and the taste. When it breaks down to isothiocyanates after the cells have been crushed. This is not the source of mustard gas, but mustard gas has a vague resemblance to that odor, which is why it got labeled mustard gas. And probably the production, whenever a plant's going to go through the hassle of making a compound this complicated, there's going to be a reason for it, because that's going to be an energetic a use of energy for the plant. And it probably evolved to deter insect populations, insect predation. But sure enough, insects being what they are, they have co-evolved in turn with these plants, so that some of the insects that are very focused on brassicaceae, whether they're sucking the sap or eating the leaves, have specialized systems so that they can break down those glucosinolates without them being toxic. So kind of like warfare. You keep building bigger weapons, and then the other guy figures out how to build an even bigger weapon. So that is about all the toxicity issues that there are with brassicaceae. Little links for more information. Of course, there's Wikipedia. There's the horseradish homepage. Arabidopsis, as I said, they have there's numerous Arabidopsis pages. And if you want an excuse to travel to the UK, there's a watercress festival every spring over in the Anglia area. So put that on your bucket list. That's the Brassicaceae.